And in some states, one of the factors is called the need of the person who needs alimony versus the ability to pay of the person who's paying alimony. So in some situations, there's a need for alimony. I mean, say that there's a woman who doesn't make very much money, but the husband also doesn't make a lot of money, and he may or may not have the ability to pay the alimony. So in that situation, judges are kind of like, well, there's really nothing I can do because he needs to, sometimes they'll equalize your incomes to say, you both don't make very much money, but we'll give a little bit of money to the lower wage earner. So in those states, the judges look and try to figure out what makes it work so that the lower wage earner can sort of get by for a while. And in those type of situations, the type of alimony that's usually ordered is called rehabilitative alimony. And that means that in some states, I think in most states that use the factors, they look carefully at what do we need to do here in court to get this low wage earner up to a place where he or she can earn a reasonable living. And so let's say, for example, you were a stay-at-home mom, and maybe you have a teaching degree that you haven't taught in 12 years. And say your husband has a good job as an executive someplace. Well, in that case, the court's going to say, well, you can earn an income because you have a bachelor's degree and you were a teacher, but we fully understand that you can't necessarily go get a teaching job next week and earn a teacher's income. And maybe, since the time that you had your teaching degree, there's a requirement in your community that you have to have a master's degree to teach. So in that situation, the judge would say, well, it's going to take this woman, 4 years to get her master's degree and to get a decent job and to start getting enough seniority to where she's able to earn a living wage. And then that's how they're going to figure out the alimony payment from the husband. It's going to say, well, you got to get her started. You got to get her back into the workforce. That's called rehabilitative maintenance or alimony. So in that situation, the best strategy is get what's called a vocational assessment. If you're asking for alimony, the judges, what they really like is if you come into court and say, okay, I've been assessed and here's what I've got going for me, and here's some things that I can do, and here's what I need to do so that I can get there. If you can't afford to hire a vocational assessment person, you can get a similar assessment of yourself by using some of the free resources in community colleges and online. And so if you come into a judge, and let's say you're 40 years old, you come into a judge and say, look, I've been out of the workforce for a long time. I have a little bit of a background, but I don't have a good plan to get back to work right away, but here's what I want to do. Judges usually really appreciate that, and they like it if you come in with an expert who says, look, we've got a plan to get her back to work, but we need some rehabilitative alimony or maintenance to get from point A, which is no work experience or old resume, to point B, which is a valid, good certificate or degree or training program in an area where you can get a job. What you don't want to do is come into the judge and say, I've decided to go back to school and study anthropology or Greek mythology, and I need to go get a master's degree, and it'll take me 6 years, and at the end of that I'll have a master's in anthropology or Greek mythology. Well, judges, in my experience, unless you say there's a big demand for anthropologists in your community or you can get a job teaching that, you don't necessarily want to come in, tell the judge that you're doing something that's not highly employable. But I'll tell you what, I have lots of clients that, I used to be a nurse before I was a lawyer, so maybe I have a little passion for this, but I have a lot of clients who decide to go to nursing school because that's a job now where you can get a good job, you can make good money, you can accommodate your kids' schedule if you have kids, you can get a job almost anywhere, and you can work different shifts, and so you can work around what works for your family best. So if you come into court and say, I'm going to go to the local community college and get my RN degree, and it's going to cost X dollars and it's going to take X number of years, that's a good case for asking for rehabilitative alimony or maintenance. And the judges, they're like, okay, good, she's got a plan, this makes sense to me. Now, let's take it from the other perspective. Let's say that you're the one who makes the money and you've got a husband who makes less money than you do. You do the same exact thing. You hire a vocational assessment person and you have him assessed. I represent a woman, she was a doctor and her husband was sort of like a personal trainer. And she put him through a vocational assessment and we made him, he had to go take the testing and the vocational person said, well, here's 6 jobs you can do. Now that doesn't mean he liked any of those jobs or that he was really excited to go do those jobs. He was planning to come to court and say, my wife makes $300,000 a year and I just want to have alimony for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years to, so I can stay home and work out. And that doesn't fly well with the judge. The judge wants to say, what's your plan to get yourself back to work? And when we come in with a plan for him, the judge says, we're going to give you enough alimony to get through 3 years of training and then give you 1 year sort of a ramp up, and it's going to be a 4-year alimony award after like a, 10 or 15 year marriage. So just because one person makes a lot of money doesn't mean the other person can sit around and say, I don't want to do anything. Now, he's going to get that alimony. Whether he uses that to go to school or not is really going to be his decision. If you've been married for a long time. If you get married when you're 59 and then you get divorced when you're 62, that doesn't mean a long alimony period. But if you're older and you've been married for a long time, you might be looking at a longer term of alimony. So when you're thinking about alimony over the long term, you also have to factor in, because when you go into a settlement, alimony is one component of the settlement, and you need to remember, so you're going to divide your assets up and you're going to make a decision about alimony. So while you're in a settlement or trying to figure this out, you want to be sure to have your CPA available to you so you can sort of see how this is all going to play out, and because you might have a mortgage deduction and you might have a head of household exemption, and you might have deductions for kids and alimony, and there's kind of a big package that has to be looked at when you're trying to figure out the alimony situation. So in some of the states that have these very strict constructions of how alimony works, so you don't want to be living in one of those states who has something that says you only get alimony if you've been married 10 years. You don't want to, if you've been a 5-year marriage, you don't want to go out and go through this whole vocational assessment if it's not possible in your state. So like I said, I can't give you advice about your state, but I can tell you that before you even start down the road of trying to figure out what alimony might be appropriate in your situation, whether you're receiving it or whether you're paying it, you have to go and figure out how it works in your state. And the best way to do that, of course, is talking to a lawyer. That doesn't mean you have to hire a lawyer to handle your whole divorce, but because we're issue spotting together, you need to say, well, there might be alimony, I don't make very much money, or he doesn't make very much money. Alimony might be appropriate in our situation. I'm going to go talk to a lawyer and have a lawyer tell me how that might come out in our particular situation so that you can put that together as part of your package. And then you also want to be sure to probably talk to a tax advisor to help you figure out how that all fits in together. So hopefully you've got sort of an idea about how alimony works or spousal maintenance, and you understand the importance of finding out how it works in your particular state and the importance of really getting a legal consult around this, even if it's just a couple hours with a lawyer. You don't need to hire a lawyer for everything, but there are certain situations where you really have to get some good legal advice, and I would say that this is one of them.